It's official. Video games are the biggest entertainment medium on the planet.
Thousands of titles.
Millions of players.
Billions of dollars.
But that's not important.
Because it's not the big numbers that make gaming great.
It's the experience.
You already know that, and so do we.
This isn't another show just trying to justify gaming.
What's there to justify? It's awesome.
It is.
No, we're here to cut through the noise.
And speak from our hearts.
About the games that we love.
And even those that we don't.
Because we love games just as much as you.
From Wii Sports
To esports.
From the platformer
To the puzzler.
all are welcome in this Video Game Nation. The Evil Within is a game built to make you go, ugh, at every possible opportunity. The sound of something being cut to pieces fills the air. Ugh! You wade waist deep in something that's definitely not water. Ugh! You have to retrieve a key from a dead body using just your bare hands. Ugh! That's the Evil Within. One long ugh from start to finish. It's a game that revels in subjecting the player to the same confusion and hysteria experienced by its protagonist. It's also deeply and deliberately claustrophobic, right down to its restrictive aspect ratio and the limited field of view you're afforded whenever you cower like a sissy inside a locker or cupboard. There's no radar, no minimap, no on-screen indicators whatsoever, just the strangled shrieks and rattling breath of something terrible lurking somewhere within earshot. And when it's not an it's an arg. Sometimes it's a panicked other times it's a frustrated You see, there are moments, perhaps too many moments, where you'd swear that the animators were so proud of their gruesome handiwork they'd made certain deaths impossible to anticipate. You could argue that this unpredictability is just another of the game's many nightmarish qualities, but the truth is that it often feels unfair for unfair's sake. But the more you soldier on, the more you become attuned to its twisted logic and devilish traps. What once seemed overwhelming and impenetrable becomes manageable and intuitive, enjoyable even. Eventually, it hits you. This is Resident Evil 5. No, not the all-guns blazing, mildly racist Resi 5 that we ended up with, but a superior Resi 5 from an alternative timeline where the almighty Resident Evil 4 got the successor it actually deserved. It's no coincidence either. The Evil Within was devised by Shinji Mikami, creator of both the original Resident Evil and Resi 4, who's made sure to include a couple of visual nods to iconic moments from his previous triumphs. But there's more to the Evil Within than a few heavy-handed homages that make it so identifiably Mikami.
I think usually when you think of Mikami, you kind of think of zombies and gore and horror and all that stuff. But I would remind you that Shinji Mikami also made Aladdin for the SNES. So for me, Mikami will always be associated with sort of taking a journey through a whole new world on a magic carpet with a monkey.
I was playing Evil Within the other day, and my character says out loud, "If he finds me, I'm dead." And I was like, well, yeah, like, of course you are. Like, that doesn't need to be said. And like in any other game, I would have switched it off. But with that, I'm just like, oh, that's really good.
A lot of people talk about Shigeru Miyamoto as the Steven Spielberg of video games. And I think Shinji Mikami is the Stephen King of video games. Because what he does is he creates horror stories which are about real human beings in terrible circumstances. And that's what it is. He puts you into these positions where you understand and believe all the characters, but yet horrendous supernatural horror is happening to them.
Perhaps the sharpest distinction to be drawn between Resident Evil 4 and The Evil Within is in their choice of hero. With Resi 4, we had Leon Kennedy, a rookie cop turned gung-ho special agent who thought nothing of somersaulting through a second-story window or performing German suplexes on parasite-infected villagers. The Evil Within keeps things a little more grounded, with troubled detective Sebastian Castellanos, who gets out of breath after jogging for 3 seconds, aims a pistol like he's on his 4th pint, and thinks nothing of crawling under a bed to avoid a fight. Castellanos probably shares more in common with Joel from The Last of Us, albeit without the freakishly amazing sense of hearing. Like Joel, he's not averse to sneaking around if it means saving a few bullets. He also shares the bearded anti-hero's ingenuity, as demonstrated by his ability to disarm traps and use the spare parts as ammo for the suitably named Agony crossbow. It's just a pity that the similarities with The Last of Us start and end there. The Evil Within's plot bumps the action along from location to location like a theme park ride, with a supporting cast of non-entities who conveniently drop in and out to blurt out cryptic dialogue.
The menace is here. Settle down.
Castellanos is also weirdly unfazed by the insane, horrifying events he's exposed to, reacting to scenes that would scar most people for life with such detached exasperation you'd think he'd realise he'd just run out of tea bags. Unfortunately, it's more disappointing proof that Japanese story-driven games are seriously lagging behind their Western counterparts.
I don't think Japanese storytelling has fallen behind the West at all. I just think they do things a very, very different way. You know, in the West, really, they've gone more towards movies. And you see David S. Goyer writing Call of Duty and things like that. Like, they've gone Hollywood style, whereas Japanese have sort of kept their sort of weirdness and their sort of really originality as well. And I don't think they've fallen behind at all.
Moreover, I would say Japanese developers, they put the story on the back burner and they put the gameplay first, which is something that Western developers maybe flip around from time to time.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to actually say for sure that that kind of storytelling is falling behind per se. I think that's a little bit subjective. But the kind of storytelling that we are drawn towards, perhaps, like Last of Us style storytelling, I think emulates Western Hollywood type conventions.
As I say though, The Evil Within is an unapologetic theme park ride full of screams, twists and cheap thrills. If, like Castellanos, you don't worry too much about the hows and whys and just go with the uhs, you'll have a much better time. And if it's still all just a little bit too much for you, Mr. Robertson has some distinctly unhorrifying Mikami classics he'd like to show you.
Hello, television friend. Hi, Def. High five. With Aoife and Dan playing The Evil Within, or as I like to think of it, blood on your waistcoat, every steampunk's nightmare. Let's you and I sit down and have a chat about Shinji Mikami, the game's creator, the innovator who hit the mainstream and changed its DNA, just like the T-virus did to the poor people of Raccoon City.
Mikami is one of gaming's great mad scientists, popularising the survival horror genre with zombie classic Resident Evil. By Resident Evil 4, he gave us the over-the-shoulder camera, a visual mechanic so engaging it's since been used by Batman, Tomb Raider, Dead Space, Gears of War and Grand Theft iPhone. He co-wrote the notorious Killer 7, the game about getting inside the heads of the people inside your head. And while famous for blood and horror, he started his career making cute titles for Disney.
Which is the kind of biographical detail that makes me worry he's got a skeleton in his closet. And it belongs to Mickey Mouse.
Today we'll look at 3 non-horror games from Mikami's diverse canon. And since Mikami's diverse canon sounds like a weapon from an anime about schoolgirls who turn into guns, let's start with his first cyborg exoskeleton game, PN03.
That's right, Mr. Mikami's principally famous for zombies and shadows, but he's covered so many genres that I'm able to really casually say his first cyborg exoskeleton game.
PN03 was released in 2003 as part of the Capcom 5, a batch of games designed to invigorate sales for the flagging Nintendo GameCube.
Every game had a big core idea, and PN03 had 2. What if you had an action-adventure game where you deliberately couldn't run and shoot at the same time, and also the whole thing played like ballroom dancing? With lasers.
You're a mercenary named Vanessa who's off to a space colony to destroy robots. The twist is, because you can't run and shoot, you boogie. And while you swing, you study your enemies. If you don't learn their attack patterns, you're dead, so you flip, leap, spin, then fire, all while Vanessa sways her hips to the music.
Sorry, did I say she swings her hips? I meant full pelvic rotation. Mikami has said he loves strong female characters, and Vanessa is a strong, feminine mercenary, all confidence and precision and agility, but isn't it weird? What will accept a female warrior doing? I just can't see somebody going, hey, in the next Call of Duty, we're going to have all the soldier boys just swing their butts to techno. I really think it'll add something. See, I've got this great idea for a game. It's about a guy who's dancing and shooting, and you'll know he's dancing because he'll be doing this. Is this good?
Mikami returned to Cyber Warriors in 2010's Vanquish, the game where America is under siege by evil Russians from space. The president's a lady, played by Lee Merriweather, who was Catwoman in the 1966 Batman movie, and only you can save the world. Who are you? You're a cigarette-smoking US secret agent in a rocket suit.
This is something I really like about Mikami. He innovates game mechanics, but he's also just a pop culture fanboy who likes to be silly.
Resident Evil was tense and dangerous and influenced by George Romero's Dead movies, but then you'd die if you couldn't find the right herb. Vanquish gave us the first ever gaming hero who could rocket slide, a totally new idea in 2010, but then your hero wears armour inspired by the 70s anime neo-human Cassern and talks like he's gargled gravel and testosterone. Oh, and the end credits let you blast the game dev team apart in an arcade-style space shooter.
This fusion of new gameplay with cheesy film and TV brings me to my favourite Mikami game, 2006's Godhand for the PS2. The game that plays like a Saturday morning cartoon and kicks ass like a hurricane at a donkey farm.
The plot looks like the usual
Destiny and a mighty warrior once vanquished an unspeakable evil, and it was foretold that one day that evil would return.
But in execution, you're a 20-something moron named Gene with a hacked-off arm that's replaced by cosmic power. There's over 100 special attacks to use. Your enemies include an obese Mexican demon named Elvis, a Lucha Libre gorilla, and mini Power Rangers, all in a glorious space western world where you can genuinely punch people into the sun.
And for all of that, it's kind of an RPG. You level up your skills, learn the 100 attacks, put them in the button slot you want them to be, and you will be the warrior you've always wanted to be. It's like Dynasty Warriors, but with just one guy, or Dark Souls 2, if it genuinely wanted you to enjoy yourself.
And trust me, the day we get a God-Hand Resident Evil crossover is the day that I'll be happy and the sky will rain with broken zombie bits.
By my reckoning, the ultimate Shinji Mikami game would be a gory, futuristic survival horror starring a dancing heroine with jet boosters in her legs who kicks dinosaurs into space. Yeah. Now enjoy these adverts while I think of a good name for it.
You're scared stiff and you can't move. It's not about chucking a grenade into a room and watching it kill everything.
At 9 on Sky Living HD.
Welcome back. Now, the best name I've been able to come up with for my Mikami mega game is Bloodgroove: Jurassic Jet Kicker. So, if any of you fancy drawing up some concept art, I'll pitch it to him next time I see him. I mean, can't imagine he's got anything better to do. Just like this assortment of opinionated orcs have got nothing better to do than hang around in pubs and discuss the merits of survival horror. Useless.
I think the survival horror genre offers a particular kind of experience, and it's sort of unique from some other genres in that respect. And it's a question of, it's a bit like horror films. You either like feeling scared or, you know, and struggling for survival and all that and seeing nurses without faces, or you don't like it. I mean, it is a bit Marmite in that regard. What's really scary is the unknown. It's the dark corners, it's the sort of funny noise in the background. It's not, to be honest, as you get with Evil Within, just endless, you know, strung up bodies. It just reminds me of the butchers down Sydenham High Street. I just can't be bothered, really.
I think survival horror is always going to divide people because some people just don't like being afraid. Like, you know, Evil Within came out pretty much like a couple of weeks after Alien Isolation, and I had to give it some, you know, both, you know, decent horror games, and I had to give it a bit of breathing space because I just thought I was so stressed playing Alien, couldn't then go straight into like a proper horror.
Different people have different tolerances for levels of gore or just gross stuff, or that high intensity, terrifying experience that you get in something like The Evil Within. Not everyone can stomach that.
So I was playing PT the other day, the demo for Silent Hills, like with 8 people. Half the people absolutely loved it because it's really, really scary. Half people absolutely hated it, thought it was the worst thing ever, but not like badly made, just because they didn't enjoy being afraid.
Survival horror is unique in video games because every single system is against you. Survival horror is all about opposing the player. In most other genres, like the controls will be accessible, or the story will be understandable, or there'll be an element of the game which is working with you. But in survival horror, it's completely different.
I think you either get survival horror in games or you just don't at all. I think the reason horror films are brilliant is because you have a protagonist who can be killed. Obviously, they never die in horror films, but the threat of them dying is real. Whereas in survival horror games, you die and you come back, so you can sort of break the spell a bit.
One game that's really stuck with me, it's from about 10 years ago, called The Suffering. In the olden days, you know, designers actually used the limitations of technology to their advantage sometimes, and I think that was actually great for the survival horror genre because you couldn't show everything on screen. You were forced to kind of think of more creative ways to create that scary atmosphere.
The best horror game ever made is Resident Evil 4. It mixes between having total power and empowerment and then being completely disempowered and feeling very, very trapped and scared and like you have to run away.
The horror game that still scares me today is not even one that I think a lot of people would think as a massive like horror game, but it's Parasite Eve on PlayStation 1, because that was so weird and the music is terrifying and you had no idea what was going on. It's still now, like, it freaks me out just hearing like the main theme, freaks me out now.
Silent Hill 1 scared me silly, and I appreciate that objectively I think Silent Hill 2 is probably a scarier game, but having played Silent Hill 1 first, obviously, and being that much younger when I played it, I couldn't get it out of my head.
Resident Evil 3, I think, was the game that, that terrified me the most, because they introduced the Nemesis, which was like a persistent, giant, stars-hunting enemy who would burst through walls with his rocket launchers and just chase you relentlessly through the game. I had nightmares about this thing. It was absolutely horrifying. And to this day, I haven't played Resident Evil 3 since.
Definitely the Fatal Frame games, which are also known as Project Zero in the UK. And this was a series of survival horror games in which you investigated haunted houses or the sites of murders, and all you had to protect yourself was a camera. You know, there were times when I just had to switch that game off because it really messed with me. It really messed with my unconscious. And that's what horror games should do.
For me, really good horror is about the psychological sort of feeling of being alone and isolated and helpless, rather than the sort of visual just wall of blood and, you know, entrails falling out. You know, yeah, we've all seen that.
I think good horror is where you find it, right? I don't think that it is a case of, you know, more or less power or weapons makes a horror game better or worse. I think that, you know, sometimes there's nothing scarier than, you know, having a gun and then it runs out of bullets, right? Like, I think that it's all down to the way that those things are paced in the game, and I think it's all down to the way that your enemies behave and what their abilities are versus what your abilities are.
Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4 both have this element in common where you never feel overpowered. So although Resident Evil 4 is obviously miles from Resident Evil 1 in terms of what it equips you with, I think the important thing in the through line and what made them both successes is that it never gives you enough that you just feel like you're going to boss it all.
I'm all about scarcity of resources in survival horror games. I think that's how you create the sense of danger and the sense of threat and tension, is when you don't have the tools that you need to kill these monsters that are around you, so you have to use your wits to outmaneuver them and get around them and hide from them. I think hiding is a really important part of any survival horror game, and if you have a massive shotgun that can, you know, blow these zombies in half, you're not hiding from them anymore, and that just makes it less scary. I think the later Resi games are more going towards action horror, which is a viable genre in itself, but I think if you want pure terrifying survival horror, you have to go back to the old Resi games where it is just you with 3 bullets hiding and running from these zombies.
Well, I think you know, survival horror as a subgenre is about Resident Evil 1 and 2 and Project Zero and games like that. It's not about action. The essence of survival horror is vulnerability and weakness. It's just like, you know, we saw it with Dead Space as well. Dead Space is a terrifying game. Dead Space 3, which brought in co-op, was useless because fundamentally horror is about the moments when you're scared stiff and you can't move. It's not about chucking a grenade into a room and watching it kill everything.
I don't know what happened.
Barry, where's Barry?
Resident Evil.
Survival horror might just be my favourite genre of all time. The excitement, the tension, the atmosphere, the cheesy dialogue, and of course, the gore. But though the 90s saw the creation of classic, iconic franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, as well as lesser known titles like Dino Crisis and Project Zero, over the last couple of years the genre has kind of died a death. But with The Evil Within and Alien Isolation reigniting the taste for AAA survival horror, as well as so many smaller, scary titles popping up on ID and Xbox and Steam, it might be that the genre is finally showing signs of life once more. The roots of survival horror games can be traced all the way back to the 1980s, with the 1982 Atari 2600 game Haunted House being one of the first titles to exhibit themes and traits now synonymous with the genre, emphasizing puzzle solving over flat-out combat, for example, and forcing the player to think about things like inventory management. Other games that played off classic horror iconography soon followed suit, games like Bandai's Terror House and Konami's Castlevania series. But it wasn't until Capcom's 1989 title Sweet Home, a game based on the horror film of the same name, that the genre really started to take shape. Released solely in Japan for the Famicom, Sweet Home had a direct influence on a little-known franchise, at the time at least, by the name of Resident Evil. The first Resi, released in 1996, pretty much set the tone for every survival horror game that followed, and in fact was the very first game to use the term survival horror in its marketing. It pioneered now standard mechanics of the genre, including multiple endings, enemies that were exceedingly tough to kill, an emphasis on inventory management, and of course, buckets and buckets of blood. Following on from Resi's huge success was undoubtedly the most prolific time in the genre's lifespan. The late 90s and early 2000s saw masterpieces like Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 4 arguably change not only survival horror, but also gaming in general forever, whilst titles like Parasite Eve, Project Zero and Dino Crisis experimented with the genre. But around the launch of the Xbox 360 in the mid-2000s, something changed. Traditional survival horror series saw a shift from puzzle solving to more action-oriented gunplay. As technology advanced, budgets went up, combat took precedent over atmosphere, and Japanese developers embraced more westernized tastes. People just didn't have the patience or the inclination to be scared anymore. They wanted to feel empowered, and developers, perhaps wanting to share the success that fast-growing genres like the FPS were enjoying around the time of the Xbox 360's launch, were only too happy to comply. Every now and then, a title like Dead Space would come along and remind us just how good the genre could be, though these games still favoured guns and ample ammo over true player vulnerability. But just when we thought the genre was dead and buried, along came the indie scene to the rescue. One-person development teams and shoestring budgets lent themselves perfectly to horror. You didn't need fancy graphics or complex mechanics to scare people, you just needed to find the right atmosphere. Titles like Slender, The 8 Pages, Lone Survivor, Amnesia, The Dark Descent, DayZ and Outlast captured this perfectly, but also in free browser-based games like Hide and The Atmospheric Witch. With the indie horror scene going strong, and audiences perhaps becoming tired of the same big budget experiences, now is the perfect time for Shinji Mikami to return to the genre he helped create with The Evil Within, as well as for brave titles like Alien Isolation to try something different. Long story short, survival horror is back, and this time, it's here to stay.
So, survival horror is back and even more terrifying than ever. In unrelated news, adult nappy sales have soared. But is survival horror here to stay, or will our appetite for nightmare-inducing gaming wane once more? Share your opinion on Twitter using the hashtag VGN or on our sexy Facebook page. And if all this doom and gloom's proved to be a bit too bleak for you, join us next week for the perfect antidote. Mummy.